The next thing I want to talk about is metalanguage. And for some of you who understand linguistics, there may be a little bit of review here. And we'll also talk about metalanguage. Okay, so what is metalanguage? Metalanguage is how to talk about languages. So we have language 1, we have language 2, Spanish. There's two different things, but functionally they're identical. It's a noun. It's a verb. It's a relative phrase. It's a nominalization. Okay, so this is easy. This is medium. And then there's stuff that's hard. Really complex ideas like grammatical metaphor or terminology that sounds kind of weird or kind of out there. Things that have very specific meanings. Pronoun, proverb. Okay, so metalanguage is the specialized language we use to describe the functionality of elements of language. And the reason why this is so important is because there's multiple levels of language. We learn some of these in school, like grammar, lexis, which is the words, and can also include phrases, collocations, which are just words that tend to show up together, and the statistical patterns of, what sounds natural, what doesn't. A good example of this is also a, thesaurus, synonyms. Another hard one, my metonym. And there's other words that have this NYM ending. You can look those up. I think those are Greek in origin. Words that in the thesaurus, even if the thesaurus says they have identical meanings, synonyms rarely actually have identical meanings. They usually have a very slightly different context in which they sound right. And it takes a ton of reading usually to know which one of those synonyms is most appropriate in which situation. Okay, so these are the ones we tend to learn about. Sometimes you'll get a little taste of semantics, which is what is the real meaning of some of the bigger chunks. What is the meaning of the sentence? We go above that and we get things like pragmatics and discourse patterns. So how do you organize paragraphs? How do you organize chapters? Pragmatics talks about stuff like, how do you say the same thing in different ways? Rules of politeness come into play here, or what we call face work. So let's say you want somebody to do something. You could say, pass me the pen. Okay, that's a command. A linguistic term, we'll do that afterwards. Pass me the pen. A statement would be, I need a pen. So you're sort of implying to the other person, pass me that pen. Can you pass, or, will you pass the pen? This is known as interrogative. This is a declarative. And this is I don't know why I'm blanking on the word. It'll come to me in a sec. Underneath lexis is the expression plane, which is either written or sound usually, but there's also sign language. So phonology is, okay, let's go back here, imperative. And then there's also the exclamative, which has a small amount of use, but it's like, hey, no. Okay, these little things that are very emotion, or ugh, or blah. They tend to be more expressions of emotion. So phonology is the study of sounds, things like syllables. Words are made up of syllables. Graphology, and also things like signs. That's another way of expressing. So these are the major levels to be aware of. Some people also talk about context. The context of the communication is important. So when you use words like that, it implies that the person already knows that was good. You're implying that the other person, you're A, they're B. You're implying that they sort of know what you mean by that. So that equals the meal we just ate. Okay, so they know what you mean. So you're taking advantage of context. And it turns out that all communication takes for granted a lot. Takes for granted what the other person knows about you, what you know about them, what you both know. Let's say you're both chemists. You take for granted that they know what hydrogen is. Whereas if you're talking to a baby, you might say hydrogen and then put a comma and say, which is blah, 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 and then continue with whatever you're talking about. Okay, so context is very important, and this is an area that's difficult in artificial intelligence to make a lot of sense of, because to a certain extent, you really need to have a theory of reality. How big is the context? Is it the culture? To really understand the meaning of something, you have to understand the culture. And, the meaning of reality, or the meaning of the full context, is quite complicated, quite huge. So context is an area that is under-theorized, meaning that we're still struggling to come up with a complete theory of context. But there's a lot of different stuff going on. Like when you're speaking to somebody of one gender versus the other, if you're speaking to somebody of a certain age, or if the status is different, these are all pieces of context that help you decide how you should phrase something. And they're taken for granted as parts of behavior. There's also other modalities. So when you're communicating with, spoken or written language, there's also your body language. There's also your tonality and voice features. And let's say you have some props, some objects. There's also the environment. Anything you do that maybe you point to something in the room that you're in, that's all part of your communication. Maybe you have music going or video, set the mood with some music. Okay, so there's a lot of other stuff going on.